Folks, what's going on? HeirofCarthage here, and today I'm going to talk through a quick video here. I guess this is kind of some tips, but also just more of a few comments on one of my favorite synergies within the High Elves when it comes to magic and unit picks. Now, it's not the only synergy out there with the High Elves. Obviously, they have access to more lores of magic than anyone else, and so clearly there's a lot of different synergies that you can put together. But I wanted to show you a couple of things today that I think will help you. I like to use this in campaign, but it's also potentially valuable in multiplayer depending on the situation. And if we have any competitive multiplayer folks here, they can comment on it. Now, from a more social multiplayer aspect, I know this will be useful to you, but how it applies in maybe certain tournaments or something, other people may have to comment more, since that's something that I don't keep as close tabs on. Now, the High Elves have access to Lore of Metal. And Lore of Metal, to me, is one of the more underrated lores in the game. I do know that some people appreciate it quite a bit, but a lot of people don't have much of an appreciation for it, and really it's a pretty well-rounded lore of magic if it's used properly. I don't think it's great in every matchup, but it's very useful. And with the High Elves in particular, you have something that a lot of factions don't, which is access to cheap archers that can fire from very long range. And it makes them a very good faction against anybody who comes into the game with a lot of low armor. And it's because these archers may not be great against high armor targets or tons of shielded targets per se, but they're going to be very good against low armor targets because you can bring a lot of them and they can mass fire, and they can be protected with an abundance of high elf spears and a decent variety of cavalry and a good variety of dragons. And so these types of units can be kept safe and fire from long range. Now, there are certain factions, though, that don't have to worry as much about these archers because they'll have a bunch of heavily armored units. And those heavily armored units don't take damage particularly fast to these cheap archers because of their armor. Well, and in comes Plague of Rust, which I want to show you all here. Plague of Rust is going to be a spell that will take off 30 armor for 4 winds of magic, which by itself is actually fairly effective, and it lasts for 44 seconds. It has a 200-meter range, so it's pretty useful, but if you overcast it, it only costs 6 winds of magic. There is a decent miscast chance, but you're going to take 60 armor off of an enemy unit. That is absolutely crippling for most units to lose that much armor, both in melee, but more importantly, from this standpoint, from range. And what I'm going to do is give you a couple of examples. I want to show you what happens to a black orc whenever it's charging towards an enemy line. This is going to be an idealized scenario. We'll load into it, and I'll go talk through it with you. Now, because of the 200-meter range on the spell, we're going to easily be able to put, and this is on the, I think it's on the Ultra unit settings, so if anybody's wondering exactly which settings we're on, that's what you're seeing here. But the Plague of Rust is going to come in right before the first volley of arrows hits in order to maximize the amount of damage. So you can see here the minus 60 armor is in place, and the Black Orc goes from 110 armor, which is fairly resistant to these type of missiles, even without a shield, all the way down to 50 armor, which is not super resistant to this type of mass skirmish fire. So the Black Orc, remember, is an 1100 gold investment for any player to bring, and it's a very important unit, because remember, well, actually I'll talk about why it's such an important unit here in a moment for the greenskins, but here you can see that it's getting absolutely clobbered by these archers. Now, again, this is a bit of a hypothetical. We can imagine that there's an infantry line here, and that the orcs have their own infantry line, and what I've done here is picked out a single target, and I've made it completely combat ineffective and even routed it before combat's even joined by most of the units in the greenskin armies. So Plague of Rust can be very effective. For 6 winds of magic, I basically just eliminated an 1100 gold unit. Now, some of you might be saying, those Black Orcs don't have a shield. They would have probably gotten torn up by those archers anyway. Well, they would have, to an extent. But I wanted to give you a good demonstration of just how much difference losing 60 armor can make. In this case, I brought a single entity monster to help demonstrate it here. This is a Bastiladon from the Lizardmen. It's a very cheap unit. It's actually pretty effective at disrupting certain factions. The High Elves are among those. You could bring several of these, well, depending on what the caps are, because I think you are limited to the number of single entity monsters in a lot of situations, but they're a cheap single entity monster that can bust through lines. And here, we're doing the same idealized test scenario. So again, we'll imagine there's an infantry line here. You can see that the Bastiladon easily makes it to the infantry line, and in this case, let's say that he charges through and straight into your archers. Yes, yes, I know. You could have monsters, you could have your own cavalry. Again, it's an idealized test scenario where I'm trying to prove a point. Look at the damage it took. I mean, it's not overwhelming, and it even managed to hold its leadership together without a lord anywhere on the battlefield, without any other units around. Now that it's rampaging, kind of stinks a bit for the Bastillodon, but it's just going to continue killing your units. I'm a little bit late, but let's say, well, what happens? What if you go ahead and turn your other archer unit and open fire? Well, here we are, opening fire. It's still not killing the Bastillodon very quickly. Maybe it would rout, depending on the circumstances in the battle. Maybe it wouldn't. But you can see the damage it's able to cause, and I'm not going to let this entire replay play out, but this Bastillodon stays here and kills every single one of my archers before I'm able to bring it down because of the amount of armor on it. So it makes a pretty big difference, and I'll show you by loading in, and we'll use Plague of Rust next time. So this time we will be zapping the 140 armor, which is considerable, of a Bastillodon all the way down to 80. And 80 armor isn't terrible. It's not terrible at all, but I want you all to see the difference. At range, it may not seem like a huge difference, but one of the things you have to remember about this game is that as units get closer to the ranged unit firing at them, typically, not always, but more and more of their shots are going to hit the target, especially when it's a big single entity target. Look, now you can see the damage being done. The creature's already rampaged before combat is even in, and again, if we imagine, because this is idealized, maybe there's an infantry line right here. Just look at that. He actually routs right about the time he would have reached an infantry line. And the 200 range on the Plague of Rust makes it very good. A couple of follow-up volleys here. And this Bastillodon is mostly useless at this point, even if it were to return from routing in a battle. So Plague of Rust makes a massive difference when trying to pull down these high armor targets, especially when you're trying to make use of these cheaper archer units that are available to the High Elves without having to spend the money that comes along with something like a Sisters of Avalorn, or the challenges in defending said unit whenever it costs a considerable amount. Beyond Plague of Rust, there's still ways that Metal Lore is very useful, and earlier I said that I'd talk to you about a particular scenario. One of those scenarios to me is against the Greenskins. The Greenskins are definitely a much more powerful faction after some of the recent updates, and they have a lot of tools that are going to make them a tough matchup for a lot, but I always have kind of felt like the High Elves are actually kind of a pretty solid counter to the Greenskins, even in the current state of play. Now, I could be wrong from a competitive standpoint, because I don't play in a ton of tournaments, or any really for that matter, but there's a few interesting points I want to make here. First, Silver and Guard, when matching against Greenskins, don't lose to any Greenskin infantry in a fight in a vacuum, right? So one-on-one. Obviously, you can have a Lord or a Shaman that can change things, or 2 units against 1, stuff like that. But in a vacuum, the Silver and Guard will defeat every other Greenskin infantry unit out there with one exception, and that exception is Black Orcs. And I just showed you here how a Black Orc does whenever it gets hit by some standard archer fire with Plague of Rust involved. And not only that, the Greenskins also rely quite heavily on light cavalry to help them out. It gives them a huge mobility component. They can chase off routing units. It lets them harass enemy cavalry and flyers and other stuff like that. Well, one nice counter to Greenskin light cavalry is being able to have a backline of Sea Guard. Sea Guard have spears, and they double to be pretty decent in melee, especially later in the game if they haven't gotten too overly abused early in the game. Plus, the Sea Guard have a shield. This gives them a lot of melee defense. Again, late in the game, it makes it difficult for cheap infantry to cut through them. And it certainly makes it difficult for light cavalry to cut through them, if it can at all. And not only that, from a skirmishing standpoint, their shield makes them much less vulnerable to that skirmishing, while they can return fire from typically a longer range than most mounted skirmishers. And so it makes the Sea Guard a very interesting choice, because the Greenskins will struggle against the Silver Guard, and then their cheaper flanking infantry can also struggle against the Sea Guard, as well as their cheaper cavalry. Now, not all of their flanking infantry will lose to a Sea Guard, but there's more than one spell in the Lore of Magic for Lore of Metal as well, and I want to talk about a couple of those real quick. Now, as far as some of my favorite ones, obviously we've talked about Plague of Rust. There's another good one here, which is Final Transmutation. And I'll go demonstrate a scenario where Final Transmutation is good. It's going to, again, be an idealized scenario, but let's demonstrate. This demonstration is going to give an example of what happens and a lot of players do this, myself included. Sometimes it can be useful to run a couple of single entity monsters, or multiple, in the same area in order to try and just absolutely brute force your way through an enemy. And I'm going to give a demonstration of why Lore of Metal can be such a nice counter to that, and kind of on multiple facets. So with this Archmage, we're going to start the battle, and this is why I said you might want to bring Arcane Conduit and the Book of Hoeth. Sometimes you don't start with a ton of Winds of Magic. In this case we don't, but because of these two abilities, we can fire up quite a bit of Winds of Magic very quickly. The spiders are coming into range. I'm going to Plague of Rust one of them, and then make it a focus of fire for my Lothern Sea Guard. And so already I'm going to be able to dish out some pretty significant damage to this spider, and then as my Winds of Magic build up, I'll be able to hit an Overcast Final Transmutation and cause massive damage to these spiders. I'm actually going to back up just a little bit here. So look, again, we've already caused some pretty significant damage. In a real battle, there's going to be other units involved, so remember that as well. And then look, both spiders are coming very close to each other, so I'm able to do massive damage to both by unleashing this Final Transmutation. So look how badly the one spider was already damaged. And again, Lothern Sea Guard, a nice combination with this because of their spears. And just look at the amount of damage that we've dished out already with just a couple of these units against two single entity monsters without any other support around. It's fairly significant. The amount of damage is pretty significant. You can see we've pulled off, you know, probably a couple thousand hit points from here almost, and then multiple thousands off of the first spider. Now, again, in this particular idealized scenario, yeah, the spiders might be able to chew through all this, but I'm just giving you this as an example of how this Archmage is able to deliver, you know, a crippling amount of damage with the right synergy with key units in the High Elf army. And a lot of players will run their single entity monsters right together like this. Now this won't be as dramatic as the ones you saw previously, because again, there's no other support units here, but I think this is a good demonstration of some of the power that this Lore of Magic has in fending off single entity monsters like this, because of its ability to have a big impact on those monsters' health, basically, and you're seeing that right here. Plague of Rust is already available again, and can actually be overcast. And I'll actually just go ahead and demonstrate this. The one spider is actually near to routing here. I don't know if we'll actually be able to force it out. It's attacking my Archmage. Look, we've got more abilities here. Let's just power up some more magic. We've gone through a considerable amount of magic already. The Sea Guard firing kind of immediately into the flank of the spider. You can see that they're having a hard time routing it. They're definitely having a hard time routing it. And if we Plague of Rust it, they won't have such a bad time. Look at the Sea Guard too, how they hold out. Look, we routed one spider. Let's have some fun. Switch our target. Plague of Rust. Let's take the armor off the other spider. Go attack. And just kind of give you all demonstration again. Now, when all that Plague of Rust comes into play, the spider has huge armor. And taking it down by 60 is going to be a substantial decrease. Now the Sea Guard will do more damage in a typical Elf Spearman or a Silverin Guard, and all others would as well. But 40-something seconds of now taking massive damage at point-blank range from another Archer unit because it doesn't have any armor. And then units like your Archmage will actually land more hits too because of the lack of armor here as well. So even cheaper heroes and stuff can sometimes get the damage done. Anyway, hopefully this gives you, again, an idealized demonstration, but a demonstration of the power that you can get put together with the Lore of Metal. So there you go. It's also useful against multiple single entity monsters, depending on the situation. But it doesn't just stop there. Lore of Metal has uses beyond that. And I feel like that these uses are pretty important to understand as well. There's two other things that I really like the Lore of Metal for, and I'm going to explain those real quick, though I probably won't do a ton of, well, I'll do one more video demonstration of one. But Transmutation of Lead is another spell in the Lore of Metal. Let's take a look at it here. It starts off at 11 magic, and honestly, it's pretty good in its base form. It's going to take off 24 melee attack, which is very substantial for cheaper units, and it's honestly pretty substantial on any unit. It's going to slow down there, and so unless a unit has like 100 attack to begin with, this is going to be a pretty big deal to be taking that much attack off. So this is a very useful thing if you have an infantry fight that's going on. You maybe need to counteract WA. It has an area of effect of 40 meters, so it's a pretty good counteractor on multiple units. Maybe there's a cavalry fight where you need this to apply. It's a very big deal. You can combine this with Plague of Rust even, and if you combine the two, it's 17 Winds of Magic, and it can effectively change a cavalry fight. Let's say that you had, for instance, as High Elves, a Silver Helm, and the Silver Helm was fighting an Empire Knight or a Reichsguard or some other armored cavalry against which it's not going to do great because they don't have armor-piercing damage. Or maybe you're about to charge an expensive infantry unit. Well, you combine that with Plague of Rust or something like Transmutation of Lead. The enemy unit can't fight back well. They've lost a lot of their attack, and they have no armor. And so you'll find yourself ripping through units much quicker than you would have thought. So Transmutation of Lead is a very effective one where you need to slow down an enemy, and it can also actually be pretty good against single entities. Now, you saw how much magic that Final Transmutation combined with Plague of Rust was taking in the last demonstration. You're not going to have magic to use all of this stuff, okay? You won't be able to use it all. But what you will be able to do is kind of pick and choose what will be best for the situation. Now, there is one last thing I'll go ahead and demonstrate, and that's going to be this the Bombardment of Searing Doom. Again, at only 6 Winds of Magic, this doesn't cost a whole lot. It does have a timer of 30 seconds when it's done, but 30 seconds isn't that long. This is something you can use multiple times in a battle, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can make Searing Doom fairly useful. The last thing that I'm going to show you here is going to involve the Searing Doom, as mentioned, and I've brought a Flamespire Phoenix just as a demonstration. Again, these are idealized scenarios. I've got a couple of Black Orcs on the other side. These are very expensive infantry units. And one thing that a lot of players will fall for, not all, but a lot of players, and almost assuredly the AI will fall for, is blobbing. And you can cause this by taking a single entity unit, or you can use your own infantry or cavalry unit, but for the sake of this spell, I would suggest using a single entity unit. There will be some friendly fire involved, and I think the friendly fire is minimized by using the single entity unit. Here, I'm going to get out here and start doing some charges on one of the Black Orcs, and I'm going to try and lure both Black Orcs into a melee by presenting my single entity as a target on the ground, and the AI will fall for this pretty much every time. My Flamespire Phoenix won't want to be in this fight for a really extended duration. You can see the greenskins are struggling. They're like, do we attack the Flamespire or do we attack the Wizard? This is the AI for you. I'm going to keep attacking them. And in a moment here, they should go ahead and commit to the fight against the Flamespire because it's right in their face, and they're going to feel confident that they can defeat it. Now, Searing Doom causes decent damage, and it's pretty focused. So look at this focused blob of greenskins right here. I'm going to drop a Searing Doom right in the middle of it. And it's not going to cost me but 6 Winds of Magic. Yeah, my Phoenix is taking a shellacking here, I understand. But you can see I can drop pretty decent damage down on some expensive units. So basically, you can combine this type of thing against expensive units, and you can do some damage to them. Again, idealized scenario, in a battle, I don't recommend getting your Flamespire beat down like this. It took a long time for the AI to cooperate. What I'm showing you is that occasionally you can put together quick blobs, and another reason I've used the Flamespire is because the Flamespire has a regeneration ability. And so sometimes there's units like this that you can kind of use in a bit of a suicidal role to lure key enemy units in for bombardment. Again, Searing Doom is nothing to write home about in terms of the damage that it dishes out. It's pretty good. It's not absolutely spectacular, but whenever you get a focused blob of enemies, it can be pretty effective. So see, like right here, this greenskin unit is pretty focused. I'm just going to drop it right on the middle of them. Now, I started moving right there at the last second because my Phoenix moved them, but you're able to see that the Lore of Metal has other uses outside of just stripping away armor. This Searing Doom is cheap, and it can be used many times throughout a battle to continue to weaken key enemy infantry units. And so again, here you can see I'm just going to kind of be charging in and out with the Phoenix, tying up these units, harassing them, forcing them to attack me, and then dropping some Searing Doom on their head as repayment for their decision to attack me. And over time, it makes a pretty big dent in the enemy's hit points. So this is something that you could try and continue throughout a battle. And, you know, if these units ignore your single entity monster, it basically gets to free attack them in the back. And if they come blob up and attack it, you can punish them for blobbing. So again, it's going to be one of the usefulnesses here of the Lore of Metal. It's kind of funny, these animations are actually causing some difficulty in landing a clean spell here because the Phoenix flies around, but it also, those animations are causing my Phoenix to not take as much damage, so, you know, win-win. See, here you go, something like this again. I'm going to go ahead and drop the Searing Doom right here on this blob. And you can see that just the one Phoenix and some Winds of Magic here occasionally have managed to take out over 50% of the health of 2 Black Orcs. And yeah, sure, my Phoenix is paying a brutal price for it. I haven't even used this Wake of Fire here. But again, just a demonstration, an idealized scenario to just give you some ideas on how you can use the Lord Metal. That'll pretty much do it for this video. I would love it if you all wanted to go down in the comments and tell me what you think of the Lord Metal. Do you think it's crap? Do you use it with the High Elves? Do you like it? Do you think it's good? Did I miss something that you all think is very important too? Now, as far as other factions that have access to the Lord Metal, you're going to have Norska, Chaos, and Empire. And if I'm missing any others, please feel free to throw them in, but I'm pretty sure those are the main factions that carry the Lord Metal. And so all of those factions may have a different way to synergize with Lord Metal, and maybe some better than others. I've demonstrated it with the High Elves here today because I feel they are particularly good at synergizing with the Lord Metal, because although they do have some units with armor-piercing missiles, they don't have tons of units with armor-piercing missiles, and so I feel like that it is a particularly good combination for the High Elves, and it's one of the reasons why I demonstrated. Like I said, would love to see your thoughts in the comments. Hope this was helpful. If there's something else you all want me to cover in a tips video, again, I'm not the world's best player at this, but I do have quite a bit of experience in the game, and I'm happy to cover something if you feel like it needs to be covered. Would love to see any suggestions you have in the comments, or if you're a member of my Discord, feel free to go into the suggestions thread in my Discord and leave some suggestions there as well. HeirofCarthage signing out for now, and I will see you all soon with some more content in Total War Warhammer 2.